Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. Today's episode is going to be a mixed bag full of a lot of information. So first I'm going to start out talking about Jax. He recently announced his In the Mind of a Man tour, and I have a lot of thoughts on that. So speaking of Jax, I'm going to talk a little bit about Brittany, what's happening to their podcast. The Valley trailer was also released, which was wild. Tamra Judge is back. See, so I'm going to talk about all of those things. In addition, I'm going to be talking about Real Housewives of Atlanta and a little bit about Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I feel like something is a little amiss for me there. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm also going to talk Southern Charm. Craig talked a lot about addiction and, alcohol use disorder and things like that. So hello, that's where I fit in best. And so here we go. It's going to be a long one today. The first thing I'll say before I start out is that you'll notice last week, I only did one episode of the podcast and did not do a bite-sized bish. And for those of you who have been following for a long time or listening for a long time, you're aware. For those who haven't, I will just be clear is that this year is a new bish, and I am putting myself and my body first for the first time ever in my whole life. And it's very uncomfortable and I hate it, but you know what? It's serving me well. And so I'm going to sit with that discomfort and I'm going to act opposite and do what's good for my body. So sometimes that means just one episode a week instead of two. But what I will say about that is what you really love about the podcast is the extra content, please check out my Patreon. I do a lot of bonus content there. Specifically, I kind of just record videos, anywhere from 5 minutes or so, just giving an update or talking about real stuff. And so for anyone who wants updates, you can go ahead to Patreon, your Bish Therapist or Melissa Reich, and check that out. So let's just get into it. Not today. Today I'm going to read Jax for Filth because I am just so tired of these Bravo men who just do these things and suffer really no consequences. And not only do they not suffer consequences, they actually get rewarded. So we found out, I talked about this on my podcast before, is that Jax went on Alex Baskin's podcast, but it turns out this was all just really a way to launch two things: Jax's new solo podcast and his money grubbing tour, In the Mind of a Man. And yes, I called it money grubbing, and I really do stand by that because what originally happened, I'll catch everyone up, is a couple weeks ago, I forget exactly when, it's not my brain's best attribute. Like it could have been a month ago or a week ago. I couldn't tell you. But Jax went on Alex Baskin's podcast to talk about his being, an addict, or I forget whatever words he used. He said he was a cocaine addict, and also he felt he really didn't have a problem with alcohol, but every time he used cocaine, he also drank. So he figured he would just give that up too. And so I'm just laughing because, the one thing about this all is that I can spot real stuff and I can spot the fake stuff. And so now I can spot this is all fakery to promote his new podcast. Because so Brittany and Jax, we see in this trailer for The Valley, which was so wild, is that Brittany this season served Jax with papers. She's filed for divorce. She wants sole custody, order of protection, and all these things on Jax. So they had this podcast together called When Reality Hits. And as soon as Jax announced his, on Alex Baskin's podcast, as soon as he did that, Brittany took the opportunity to do her own podcast where she talked about feeling like Jax is full of shit. And I completely agree with her, and I will tell you why. So Brittany was doing her new photo shoot to take over this podcast on her own, which I love. I support Brittany. I think she's amazing. And I'm really excited for this opportunity for her without, the albatross around her neck. And so she was talking about doing all of that. And then Jax all of a sudden announced this tour, In the Mind of a Man. That's literally the name of it. And I can tell you what's in the mind of this man: a whole bunch of bullshit. And here's how I know why. All of this was just it was a ploy to promote Jax's new solo ventures, right? So what Jax thinks he can do is just announce that he had a problem, say that he no longer has that problem, go and tour and try to, those of you who have listened to this podcast for a long time, I use this analogy where people try to take the bridge over healing, and they think that it's a shortcut, and they think that, they're really smart and they found a way around it. But I'm telling you, there's no way around it. And so what Jax did was he went to treatment, he came out, and he's exhibiting the same behaviors that are characteristic of active addiction, which is ego, hubris, narcissism, all of these things. Because what I'll tell you to be true is that when people get sober, they take a real inventory of their life. They take stock of the ways that they have been led by ego, the way that they have tried to control things that are out of their control. There is a real awareness of there's something greater than me in this world. I am not the center of the universe, right? There's like an awareness. There is a humility. That's the word I'm going to use here. There's a humility in people who really do get sober, and Jax doesn't have it. Jax is telling me that he took a bridge over healing so that he can now sell his bag of bullshit to anybody who's going to listen. And unfortunately, there are always going to be fans happily ready to sign up to support Bravo men's bad behavior. I think that James Kennedy is a great example of this. I talked about that on my last podcast. James is done here. So the only reason I'm bringing him up is to give an example of how James still has 1 million followers on Instagram, which, I know that can be bought, and I know people do buy them, which is not something I subscribe to, which is why I'm still slowly creeping up there. But listen, for me, my humility means slow and steady wins the race, and I'm not doing anything that does not jive with my moral compass. And I don't believe in buying anyone, followers, listeners, people. You're here because you like me and you want to be a part of the community, or that's fine if you don't. But Jax is somebody, Jax and James and Tom Sandoval, they're just all cut from the same cloth. And the thing is, I didn't watch Traitors. I know people really wanted me to. I just couldn't get into it. I have so many shows that I watch, and I listen to my body, and I go where I authentically feel led. And I just don't authentically feel led to Traitors. But, so many people love Traitors. And there was this article released about Tom Sandoval, how he, is Bravo ready for his comeback? And I'm like, what do you mean, are they ready? He's been come back. When has he ever not come back? And here's what I will say with Tom. He got an inordinate, insane amount of hate, right? Death threats and all this wild stuff, which is just disgusting. And, if you're sending someone a death threat because you're upset about something that they did on TV, you need to take stock of your inventory and figure out what that's about for you, because that is not healthy nor appropriate. But my point is that Tom hasn't changed. He is who he is. He's, Jax, James, these are all people who are going to be who they are. And the fact of it is that Bravo fans are just so happy to, I don't know, give them a comeback. And I just personally, I just don't subscribe to that. I see Tom for exactly who he is, and Jackson, James, and all of that. And so I think that anyone goes to this tour of Jax's you're giving money to a snake oil salesman. So buyer beware. I would not give 1 red cent to go. In fact, if it was free, I'd go if it was free, but only if I could do a podcast on it afterwards to kind of debrief with all the bullshit that Jax is saying. I think that Jax is doing what a lot of people do, which is it's easier. Admitting that you have a problem is the first step, but a lot of people think I do that, I go to rehab, and then that's it. And I live the rest of my life. And it's well, that's missing a whole chunk of stuff. And I just feel that from his behaviors and hearing what he's saying, and, Brittany said on her podcast that she counted 30 lies. I just can make an honest assessment for myself is that Jax has not changed. He is not different. He's just going to make you think he is. And I hope that no one falls for it. So I'll be here to, I wish honestly I could be there to debrief the audience about so this bullshit that you just heard, let's use this as a great example to talk about how you can spot real humility versus faux humility. That is what I would love to do after Jax. So in the Valley trailer too, we see, just like a lot of contentious stuff between all of the couples. And then we see that Kristen and Luke turn out to have like the most healthy, stable relationship out of anybody, which is such a just not what you would expect. And so I'm just really, again, frothing at the mouth to cover the Valley. I am planning a couple of really exciting things in the next couple of weeks, but I am going to do something different this season, which is I'm going to take a mid-season break. Meaning my birthday, I'm turning 44 on 4/4, and I have a couple really great episodes planned with Mandy Slutzker and Lindsay and Brady from Recap Rodeo. And due to, my newfound, I don't know, whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm just listening to my body. I'm trying to do what's best for me, what's best for you all. It's been a really, I don't know, interesting thing to navigate for me. But I think I'm going to take a break after I do those birthday episodes with Mandy and Recap Rodeo, and then come back for the Valley premiere, because I feel that this season I could probably do a podcast per episode. I've never done that before. I don't know if you all would like that, if you wouldn't like that. So please give me your feedback. In terms of what you like and what you want me to cover. So TBD on that. We'll see. So the other thing I want to mention before moving on is that Tamra Judge is back on her shit. A couple weeks ago, she announced that she was leaving Real Housewives of Orange County due to feeling stressed out about Teddy. Teddy and Tamra do have Two Teas in a Pod podcast, if for some reason you're unaware of that, but they do. And they did a podcast where they both talked about, how hard Teddy's diagnosis has been. When you love someone who has cancer, it is so scary. It's hard, it's traumatic. And so, because that's my soft spot, being a 2-time cancer survivor living with a chronic incurable cancer, is that I understand the grief that comes with loving someone with these health issues. It's hard for my husband. It's hard for my closest friends. It's hard for people who really love me to see me struggle. At first, I bought Tamra's whole thing because I understand what that grief is. It's painful, and it does give you perspective about the real important shit. And to be honest, I think sometimes people like Jax, they think they have perspective, but they don't. And if I'm being fair, I thought that I had perspective, and I didn't have as much as I thought either. Even being a one-time cancer survivor, or, working in the field or what have you, until I understood concepts from a professional and a patient perspective, honestly, my perspective has been very informed. And I think that's what people really like about me, right? I'm a professional and a patient, and I understand things from the inside out. And a lot of people, don't experience that. Well, the people with cancer, you either experience it or you don't. There are people listening to this podcast who are like, yes, I totally get it. And there are people who are like, I hear you, just don't really have the experience. And so I thought that Tamra really was so overwhelmed with what was going on with Teddy that, she really was going to leave. And then it turns out that that's not the case. She is coming back. And so, I'm going to be honest, it just leads me to believe, that Tamra has a history of using circumstances high in emotion to get out of trouble, or to get out of tough situations, or, to run away, to say you'll never see me again. It's like I said last podcast, it's like the girl who cried wolf, the boy who cried wolf, but Tamra Judge cried wolf. And so I think that listening to the podcast that she did with Teddy, it tells me that there is a real kinship there. There is a real love. There is a real support, but also, I think Tamra needs to earn a check. And, she put her foot in her mouth when she almost got sued, talking about how Venus CBD earns more than Ryan stole from the baseball player, whatever. She almost got sued for that. But I think while the business is doing well, I also think so much of her identity is tied into Real Housewives of Orange County that even if she wanted to leave, I don't know that she has that capacity. It's like her whole world, it's her identity. I think that having a platform is great because depending on what you use it for. And so I understand this platform, it's her job, it's her money, it's her living, but also I think it's really connected with who she feels she is. And to me, the problem for housewives is when they start to feel they are the show, because then it just gets into all these messy, like the Teresas and the Melissa Gorgas. And, I don't know. I think going along the theme of today's podcast is like the hubris, the ego of housewives. There are people who started Housewives, but it's not their show. It's not Andy Cohen's show. It takes a village to create the show. There have been many people who have been on it, and there is no one person who to me is greater than anything else, right? It's a machine, and we appreciate the cogs in the machine, and there are certain cogs that are bigger than others, right? Like the OGs, all of those folks. I think it's important how we look at our opportunities. I could easily, by the way, I could use this opportunity to create a cult. There are at least 25 people listening right now that if I was like, hey, I'm going off the grid, let's go into a commune and start a cult, there would be 25 people at least who would sign up for that. Okay. And the reason why I'm laughing and I'm joking is because it's absurd and I don't want that and I would never do that. But my point is I could. And I think it's really important what people do with the power that they get. That says a lot about them and a lot about their character. And so it's just something important to note. But Tam is back on her bullshit, and I feel a little personally fooled because I gave her the benefit of the doubt because, I understand the grief that comes with loving someone with cancer. And make no mistakes, there are really serious things going on for her, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. So, listen, Tam's doing what she's got to do. Jax is doing what he's got to do, but that doesn't mean that I have to like any of it or buy it. Bloop. Moving on. So I'm going to talk about Real Housewives of Atlanta because Real Housewives of Atlanta was one of my absolute favorite franchises in addition to Jersey. It was, to me, the big three was Real Housewives of Atlanta, Real Housewives of New Jersey, and Real Housewives of New York, the original cast. So I feel that basically what happened was they took a year hiatus and did like an entire reboot of the cast. And just as someone who's watched this franchise since, Kim Zolciak's shiny wig era, her thank you, Big Papa era, her chain smoking era, just like it was peak Kim Zolciak. And it's sad now because the thing of it is that Kim is not in a good spot. Her home, they finally did have to sell it or it was foreclosed upon. Her and Croy have this insane back and forth toxicity in terms of their relationship. The kids have been traumatized. What we watched, what made her great TV in the beginning is the same delusion and ego that led to all of these things, right? Because hubris and ego is great when we're doing great, but when we're not, it can really bite us in the butt. And so I am loving Atlanta, I have to say. So the cast, for those of you who haven't watched or, you're saying, should I go back to watching? I personally say yes. So the cast, I will tell you, is Portia, which, Portia's been on and off and on and off. And there was a time where Portia had her own show. Do you guys remember that? It was like she took her family on like a retreat, and I forget even what it was called. I should have looked that up before I started this, but Portia has been a staple on Bravo. And, I love Portia, so happy she's back. Then we have Drew, who I'm going to be honest, I don't I'm not a fan of Drew. I don't really understand why she's there. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but I just think she plays dumb all the time, and she isn't. And she also plays it really poorly. There's just something about her I'm just not a fan of. Shamia, to me, is one of the greatest casting decisions that they've made to build this cast around Shamia. So Shamia has been a friend of for a long time on Atlanta, but now she finally has her peach. And not only does she have a peach, but she wants center peach because, and truly give it to her, because Shamia is the glue that holds this group together. She really, born and raised in Atlanta. Her husband does HVAC work for Atlanta airports. And so, at first I was like, are they really that rich, or is this like a fronting sort of situation? No, honey, they are that rich. Her home, not only is it's just gorgeous. It's impeccably decorated. It is so beautiful. And, at her birthday party, she gets this Rolls Royce. I can't even pronounce what it is. It's like a $450,000 car, which is like, holy Moses. Imagine the acupuncture treatments that could buy for me. That's how I look at everything now. I'm like, would this be worth paying for it, or would it be worth putting it into my body and living my life? But, fortunately, she doesn't have to make that decision, and good for her. But I'm really loving Shamia. Here's the thing. I didn't realize Shamia was so funny. She's funny. She's quirky. She's silly. She might be the Dorit of Real Housewives of Atlanta, because in her first initial, whatever you call it, confessional talking head, they're asking her about how she met her husband. And she was like going on and on and on. And it showed the producers being like, hey, can you get to the point? And then she, tells this really funny story about how, she went to his house and she like took a shit. And the next time she came over, he had wipes for her. And I was like, what a love story. But honestly, you know what? I'm not kidding. That's how these two people will last forever. If, people who are like, well, you can't fart around someone, or you can't let them hear that you have bodily experiences. And it's like, that's not the way to a long lasting, healthy relationship. People have bodily functions, and, they do all sorts of things. And so if you can find someone who loves you for you, well, you have found yourself a winner. That is what I call a win-win situation. Now, the one thing that I don't love is that Phaedra is back. However, Phaedra's back, but so as of this podcast recording, there are 2 episodes out now, and Phaedra has not been in one of them. So I'm confused, but Phaedra is a very complex character, because the whole reason why she was fired from the show is, in case anyone doesn't remember, I will literally never forget this. And I'm very sad that I wasn't covering Housewives, by the way, when this came about, because it was a big deal. So all season, Phaedra told Portia that Candy and Todd wanted to drug and sexually assault her. That is what Phaedra claimed. Now, Phaedra claimed that she heard that from somebody directly, but she made it up. She lied. She admitted, like, it was one of the most wild reunions. It was a rare and elusive part 4 Real Housewives of Atlanta reunion. And Phaedra just got crushed by, having to acknowledge the fact that she used this to manipulate her quote unquote friend Portia. She lied, which could have had insane effects for Candy and her business. And, as a lawyer, right, as a therapist, when you hold positions like that, what you say matters. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to misspeak. I already have misspoken, and I've already gotten in trouble for that. But it's the intent behind what you do. And so Portia, or Phaedra, willingly knew, like willfully lied about something that could have ruined Candy and Todd's life. And when you're a lawyer and you're willing to do something like that, that tells me a lot about your character. And as a result, I used to love Phaedra. I just could not recover from that personally. And there's a lot of people who won't watch Atlanta for that reason. And if you're one of those people, well, good for you. Stand on your morals and your values, and there's nothing that you'll miss. And if you want to hear what the show is all about, well, I'm happy to tell you. But I do think that where we put our attention and our time and our energy is really valuable. So if, I understand if you don't want to put it towards that. To be honest with Phaedra, I'm more curious. As I mentioned, 2 episodes have already aired and she hasn't been on any of them. So I'm just more curious about it. And I'm wondering if now that also Kenya was supposed to be back, but Kenya was fired because of a revenge porn situation with cast member Britt Eady. So this is so wild to me. I'll just explain what we now know happened. Is Kenya had like a spa or like a hair salon or something, and for the party, for the opening day party, what Kenya did was she sourced. So she found the photos, she printed photos, and then she displayed photos in a revenge porn situation, which led Bravo HR to have to step in and fire Kenya on the spot. And so we've seen Kenya here and there. She filmed a scene, I think, with Drew. I forget who she filmed a scene with. And we did get to watch that. But aside from that, she has been cut out because Bravo is not playing when it comes to that sort of stuff. And Bravo finally has policies in place, which they didn't have good policies before. And it led to a lot of ambiguity, but now they do. And so Kenya being fired, I wonder if Phaedra came back after Kenya was fired. I'm wondering if that's what happened, or I don't know, maybe I could Google it and find out the answer. I don't have all the time in the world, and that's my best theory. So if you know more about that, please let us know. So in addition to this, we have newbies Angela Oakley, who I really like. I just immediately like her. She seems like a tough cookie, but calls it like she sees it. She's direct, she's assertive. She doesn't seem to stand on bullshit or take bullshit. And, I like that very much about her. There's also Kelly Farrell, who owned Nana's Chicken and Waffles, and she's going through a terrible divorce with somebody who there were allegations of domestic violence. And so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, Britt Eady as one of the newbies. And then OG legend Cynthia motherfucking Bailey. For those of you who have listened for a long time, you'll know Cynthia is one of my all-time favorite housewives. I think she, to me, is a prototype of someone who is, first of all, she's gorgeous. Second of all, she's interesting. Third of all, she's hilarious. And fourth, she is a good mix of emotional intelligence and shade, which I don't know. I think I relate to her too, because I feel like I can be shady and give hot takes. But at the end of the day, I'm just like a person who's trying to do good work. And, I might be a little shady, but I'm really not here to run people all the way down. And neither is Cynthia. She has morals and values, and she just seems like a great person. Every podcast that I hear her on, I just adore her. And so I'm happy to hear that she is back. So as I mentioned about the incident with Kenya, by the way, before I move on, I do have to say her downfall of her coming in another moment at a hair salon is poetic, because for anyone who remembers the Kenya more hair care, dun, 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 the drum line, Kenya more hair care. It was one of the most shady moments, arguably, to me, across all of the franchises. And so I think her downfall being another shady moment at a hair salon, being her downfall, is so fascinating to me, because sometimes we have to learn a lesson. And if we're not going to learn it, the first time or the second time or even the fourth time, life is going to smack you up your head and say, well, you didn't listen, so now you're going to fall flat on your face. I think sometimes the universe or life has a way of doing that. And so for me, it is just a great reminder that unchecked anger and resentment will destroy us eventually. We cannot allow our emotions to control us, because it's easy to go from victim to villain just like that. And in my opinion, Kenya has one of those problems that a lot of housewives fall prey to, is that she has a stubborn unwillingness to take accountability, and eventually that's going to be a downfall. So for example, Nene Leakes, same thing. Nene is someone who I adore, but she could never take accountability for when she was wrong. And, Kenya and Nene are types of people who, when they get angry, they just feel it's okay to just really lash out on people and to just, do all these things. And, sued Bravo. And even though she dropped the suit and all these other things, it's like, talk about biting the hand that feeds you. And so I think that to me, Nene and Kenya are two great examples of people who, if you let that ego, you let that hubris lead you, well, it's going to lead you straight to hell. Just letting you know that right now. So, and speaking of crashing and burning, Phaedra, as I mentioned, she's back. But the reason she's back also, in addition to all the other things that I hypothesized, she completely burned her bridges with her Married to Medicine cast members, so let me be clear. After she made those allegations and she got caught for that and she got fired at the reunion, she hopped over to Married to Medicine and she filmed and she did that for a while. But guess what? She did all the same behaviors that she did before, and she burnt those bridges completely. It ended with, for people who watch Married to Medicine, I don't watch it, but I did see, basically, it was like the episode aired after Atlanta, and we got to see Dr. Jackie talk a little bit about Phaedra. Phaedra wrote a check and she said, I'm done with you all, and rode into the sunset. And so what's my point here? My point is that we are destined to repeat patterns that we are not willing to address. And Phaedra, Kenya, and Nene, to me, are all examples of people who they just bought into their own bullshit and they thought they were above the law or Bravo or whatever. And, they're experiencing consequences for that. So I don't know. It's interesting. So what else did I want to talk about here? One other very important thing talking about Real Housewives of Atlanta is that Shamia was open about her daughter Shiloh having a complex issues following. Okay, so the long and the short of it is that Kandi Burruss welcomed her daughter or son, I can't remember who, maybe it was her son, via a surrogate who her surrogate's name was Shadina. Shadina was featured on Real Housewives of Atlanta seasons ago. Kandi and Todd, they did this very cool, it wasn't like a baby shower. It was like a block party, but it was to honor, their soon to be child, which Shadina was a part of because Shadina was a surrogate. Well, Shadina was also the surrogate for Shamia and Shamia's husband. And when she was 32 weeks pregnant, she found a lump in her breast and she was diagnosed with a rare and very aggressive form of breast cancer, which meant that Shadina had to give birth immediately to Shiloh at 32 weeks, which is, 40 weeks is gestational, and those weeks really, really matter. We see in last night's episode is that Shiloh was delivered prematurely and experienced a slew of medical conditions that required surgery as an adult. Shamia revealed that her daughter was diagnosed with choanal atresia, which is a rare birth defect that blocks the nasal passages, requiring several surgeries. Like, they had to drill and do all of these things on that poor, sweet little baby. And so the other thing that Shamia revealed is that she went through 7 rounds of IVF to have another baby and experienced an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy in the fallopian tubes. And her tube exploded and she almost bled out in the ER. And so one really important thing that she brought up that I do feel it's really important to talk about is that not only there's a lot of stigma in certain communities in terms of how you have a baby, and surrogacy is frowned upon, which it shouldn't be, because to me, women's reproduction is far too many people's businesses that it's like, no, every woman in every situation in every family is so different, and it's up to them to make these decisions. And I just don't like anyone judging or casting judgment because it's just so inappropriate. Nobody ever knows the battles people are fighting unless they're telling you. And so Shamia is telling us that she was scarred by infertility and an ectopic pregnancy that permanently impacted her body. And the other thing is that as a Black woman, there are insanely high mortality rates for Black women. So the CDC reports the maternal mortality rate for Black women is 50.3, which is significantly higher than rates for white women, which is 14.5, Hispanic women 12.4, and Asian women 10.7. America's ongoing Black maternal health crisis is a national tragedy that goes largely unnoticed. The U.S. has more maternal deaths than any other quote-unquote wealthy nation in the world, and Black women are around 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. So to me, this is so important because we watched the scene between Shamia and Shadina. It was just heartbreaking. They both cried and they both said, I feel so bad and it's my fault and it's my fault. And it's like these two women are blaming themselves for systemic failures that have failed Black women in terms of maternity mortality rates. Systemic racism and, a broken system and, terrible healthcare. I can speak to that. But as a white woman, I do have privilege in the healthcare system that Black women do not have. And so my point is I appreciated the vulnerable discussion of stigma surrounding women's reproduction. And so it's just a reminder that let's just mind our business. People are going to the resources that they have to build families, and there should be no shame or stigma around it. And so I just really appreciated the vulnerable discussion around this. And I think Shadina and Shamia are amazing women, and I hold them up and I support them. And I can't wait to hear more about, Sweet Shiloh, because she is still going through some undiagnosed issues. And Shadina talked about feeling bad because she had no idea how the cancer growing in her body may have affected Shiloh's development. And it's such an awful situation for all three women, Shiloh included. Shiloh, Shamia, Shadina. It's just tragic for everyone involved. And so it seems like Shadina is doing much better. She's had a double mastectomy. We didn't hear more information about that, but I really hope that she is doing well because, this woman, Shadina, has her own family, but she gave her body to help other people bring children into this world. And, it's such a gift that Shadina is giving, and to hear how she's been impacted, it makes me sad too. So I just support all these women so much. And I'm grateful that they talked about that. All right. I kind of have to move on because I've been talking about this for too long, but I am trying to think about, okay, with Real House of Atlanta, before I move on, the one major thing that is going on between Portia and Drew is, to me, so annoying because Dennis is the Harry Dubin of Real Housewives of Atlanta. And I do not understand why these fabulous women recycle these dumbass men. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get Harry Dubin. I don't get Dennis the hot dog man. I don't get it. If you have discarded this person, why does every other woman line up to say, you know what, let me try this? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so, we see Portia and Shamia confront Drew about this, and Drew does what she does best, which is saying a whole lot without saying anything at all. She uses a lot of words to say nothing important and beat around the bush. And I absolutely can't stand that. I think that's one of the reasons why I don't like Drew is, I am clearly direct. I gravitate towards women like Angela, like, a lot of these women on Real Housewives of Atlanta who are direct and straight to the point. That is how I prefer to communicate. And so Drew pretending that she's confused and she's dumb, and it's like, you're not dumb and you're not confused. You know exactly why Portia's upset, and you should have talked to her about this. Now, people will say that Portia has no right to be angry because she took Fallon's husband, and also like, what a prize she got, right? Because we all found out that Simon was a scammer and he has been deported, and he scammed Portia too. Like, he's done a lot of women wrong, and he just, kept doing it and doing it. Now he's doing it somewhere else to some other women, wherever he is. Because I'm telling you, that man is not going to change. But my point is that, Drew keeps talking about Dennis in all these ways, like he's this amazing producer. And Portia goes, well, Dennis did produce an album of kids songs for PJ. So basically, Portia is sniffing out the bullshit. She understands this is ridiculous. This is a ploy. Ralph is now a basement dweller and she doesn't have him. So she's trying to snatch Portia's storyline. And the other thing I'll say before I wrap this up is that not only does she try to snatch Portia's life, she tried to call production to film with Dennis for Portia's company, Go Naked Hair, without asking Portia. Okay, that is wild, wacky stuff. So my point is that Portia and Fallon were never friends. Portia and Drew actually had like a kind of big sister, little sister thing, an aunt niece sort of relationship, that sort of thing. And so for Drew to take these steps without letting Portia know is extremely different than Portia doing this with Fallon, who, by the way, was a one and done cast member who no one even still talks about and barely remembers. They weren't friends. Also, though, in fairness to Portia, she is paying the price for, continually having a bad picker, which is something that I really hope that she does work on, because Portia's picker, a lot of these ladies' pickers is just not good. I want to do a show where I'm like, let's look at your pickers and let's help to readjust them, like how with like one of those sundials, like you have to readjust it based on the moon and things like that or whatever. Well, I have to readjust these ladies' pickers because they deserve better and it isn't good. Okay, now one thing I want to talk about before I move on to Southern Charm, I'm just going to talk about this very briefly, but I feel that there's something about Real Housewives of Beverly Hills that is feeling, I can't even put my finger on it. So this is why I'm saying it into the mic to you all, because some of you understand me and support me better than my own family. So maybe you'll understand this, but there's just something about Real Housewives of Beverly Hills that feels icky. I think we're missing some authenticity, some genuineness that maybe we used to have. Everything feels too, I don't know, produced or cliquey. And so one thing that, Jennifer Tilly is new to this group, and I'm always fascinated by her because, I mean, she is, extremely rich. She is a excellent poker player. And for people who don't understand, to be an excellent poker player, you have to be really good at reading people. And so Jennifer Tilly possesses something that I possess, which is an ability to read people in ways that maybe other people don't see. And my point in sharing that is I trust her self-reports more than I trust some of the other people's self-reports. I think Kyle and Sutton and Garcelle and everyone is trying to be really like calculated and trying to jockey for position. And so Jennifer seems like this really interesting diamond in the rough, pun intended, talking about how this is her quote. She said, "It's a cliquey group that's tough to crack." And the thing that I don't like is that Jennifer Tilly shared feeling different growing up, kind of more of an odd duck, which odd ducks are my people. So if you're an odd duck, well, welcome to the party, because so am I. But I love, odd ducks, the scapegoats, the outcasts, those are my people. And because they're usually good people who have just been like harshly judged by society and like cast aside. And, then we all come here to YBT and we form a community. But it proves my point that I talked about this with Bronwyn last season, is that being a housewife presses on unhealed wounds. And a lot of women become housewives to, try to feel popular again or try to feel like important or somebody. And I think that, I always say this, humans tend to unconsciously create unhealthy dynamics in their adult lives. So, if you're in a work environment that is eerily similar to your unhealthy family dynamic growing up, well, you're not alone. Most humans find themselves in those situations. And I think that Jennifer has found herself here, unfortunately, because of trauma. And it's like recreating it. And I don't love that. I don't like watching someone who is fabulous feel less than because Kyle, Dorit, Garcelle, Erica, everyone is like jockeying for position instead of trying to get to know her. And I think she's really interesting. I would love to get to know her more personally. So here Jennifer is in a situation where, despite being wealthy, she is feeling excluded. Also, not only is she wealthy, but she's extremely accomplished. She's an excellent actress. Chucky, she's been in the franchise for so long. She goes to Comic-Cons. People absolutely adore her. And it just goes to show that money and fame don't make you feel good about who you are. And I think it's just an important reminder that true wealth is really an abundance of safety, love, and connectedness. That's kind of really all anybody wants. And unfortunately, you can't buy that. So another thing I'm going to talk about here is Dorit and PK go to dinner after being separated for 3 months, and the conversation was astounding to observe. And it's like, you guys don't you're not compatible at all. Dorit said, we never actually had the conversation about the apartment. And then PK said, yeah, I didn't want to have the conversation about the apartment. And Dorit was like, yeah, that's my point. And PK's like, no, that's my point. Then Dorit says, did you at any point want a divorce? And PK said, rather than bringing out the best in me, you can bring out the worst in me. For me, PK is in the same category as Jax, James, and Tom Sandoval. He's a man who got sober and believes that because he got sober, he deserves the world. And I still see a lot of ego. And I understand Dorit has her issues, right? For sure, she is a control freak. Like, PK needed somewhere to live and he chose an apartment. But the thing is, like, he was talking to Dorit about it and he was like, I humbled myself to leave our huge home and get an apartment. It's like, sir, please. Okay. Please, with the humbling yourself to live in this humble, little abode, which is actually like a really nice apartment. He's living alone. He's not parenting. He's basically back to single life. And he's trying to say, oh, poor, woe is me. Give me a break, PK. Take that somewhere else. Also, he is taking it somewhere else because PK is getting slammed by fans and he says he is not coming back next season, which good. Bye-bye. Nobody wants to see you anyway. I think that PK, when it came to the home invasion, I think that's something that happened that we'll never fully know exactly what happened. I think Dorit knows a little bit. And I think that there is just irreparable damage here. They are unable to communicate. They do not understand each other. To be honest, like I said, sometimes people get sober and realize, they're just kind of assholes. So I hope that's not the case for PK, but to me, it kind of seems like it's going in that direction. Okay. Now on to Southern Charm. I thought this episode of Southern Charm was so interesting because it starts out seeing Paige and Craig recapping his reconciliation with Austin, which includes a discussion about addiction. Craig said, I'm getting sober because I'm an addict. I come from a family of alcoholics. And so what I wanted to share is that burgeoning research studies suggest a family history of alcohol use disorder may increase the risk of a genetic predisposition to developing alcohol use disorder. So one thing I love to talk about is epigenetics, which epigenetics says that the old nature versus nurture, it's never or, it's most of the time and. And so epigenetics says that genetics and environment both play a significant role in developing alcohol use disorders and other substance abuse disorders as well. That epigenetics tells us is that we may be born with certain genes that, turns those genes on, traumas. So we may have genetic predispositions for alcohol use disorder, and then we're in an environment surrounded by an environment of use, right? And so think about that. Craig grew up with people who drank a lot. And so that was normalized. When families, I grew up in a culture of alcohol. That's a culture in my family. And as you all know, I don't drink and, I kind of think alcohol is the devil a little bit, but because to me, I saw what it does. I saw it personally, I saw it professionally, and it's just something that has always turned me off. But my epigenetics are different than Craig's. And it explains so much in terms of why one family member maybe experiences something and another family member doesn't. It's just, we're all like snowflakes, right? Just super unique. We all require specialized treatment plans. And I think that epigenetics talks about how these two things, how they kind of coalesce to develop certain issues later in life. But what was interesting to me is that Austin spoke to his sister, Katie, about knowing Craig had an addiction to Adderall in the past, but he never connected that with alcoholism. And so the fact of the matter is that most addicts or alcoholics experience a multitude of substance and process addictions simultaneously. It's rarely just ever one substance. Why is that? And it can be. There are people listening to this who are in recovery, who used one substance, maybe alcohol or one drug or whatever. Addiction is what happens, I believe, when we exceed our threshold of pain. All humans use healthy and unhealthy coping skills. And so to me, addiction, conceptually speaking, it's an unhealthy mechanism of coping. right? But if you look at the why underneath that, people aren't going to just use one thing to cope. They're going to, like it's really common for people who struggle with alcohol use disorder to struggle with process addictions like gambling or shopping or food or other substances. It's because a drug is a drug is a drug. And whether that is a process or a substance, it all comes from the same underlying mechanism. Okay. So that's my lecture for the day. I'm sorry if I'm being too serious here, but I do, I'm such a nerd. I get so into talking about this sort of stuff. And so Paige brought up the fact of how we used to think like labels like addict and alcoholic used to bring to mind these stereotypes. And she and Craig were both saying correctly that couldn't be further from the truth. Addiction looks like Craig. I mean, that's what addiction looks like. It's regular people who are smart. They own businesses. They're CEOs. They're nurses. They're doctors. They're anesthesiologists. They're police officers. Addiction transcends socioeconomic status, education level, profession, race, gender, ethnicity, all of it. The one thing that unites all humans is that we all feel pain and we all do unhealthy things to get rid of that pain. And until we have something to be our safety net, right? We can't take away something that's unhealthy without replacing it with something underneath, right? That's taking away a safety net. And that's a lot of the reason why people initially maybe aren't successful is you can't just say, I'm going to get sober. You have to say, what else are you going to do so that you don't relapse or go back to that? Or if you relapse, because relapse is a part of recovery, how are you going to have your plan, right? And so I think that their conversation was so important to talk about how alcoholism doesn't have a look. It's not some hobo on the street wearing a barrel. It's like, it's regular people. And alcoholism, I always talk about, it's a family disease, meaning everyone in the dynamic plays a role. And so due to this, it can be easy to minimize or make excuses for loved ones. Addiction is shrouded in denial. It has to be. Addiction cannot go on without denial, minimization. Addiction also becomes shrouded in denial for loved ones too, who are kind of under that same codependent spell. And this is why friends and family getting educated on recovery, it helps the whole system recover, because case in point, Craig explains the catalyst for change was nearly losing Paige due to his drinking behaviors. Her refusal to be codependent broke through his denial and minimization. He said, I'll always be grateful I didn't lose you when I hit my bottom, which I was just like, oh my God, that's so sad. It's so sad. It becomes really apparent every week that Craig and Paige are two people who loved each other, who were incompatible. Neither of them wanted to change. Neither one of them wanted to do things different. People can blame her, they can blame him, but they both were just incompatible. Love was not enough. Don't care if Craig said that that's not how it is. That is how it is. And I understand he's hurt. Never feels good to get dumped, but Paige is not a bad person. Craig's not a bad person. And it seems like they both really went through a lot together. And so I guess I want to take this other opportunity to reframe successful relationships. When my niece became a teenager, one thing I really wanted her to know is that all of your relationships, until you decide to get married, if you decide to get married, because you don't have to, all your relationships are going to end. And why I tell her that is to help her understand as a teenager, have fun. Relationships are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be, get your needs met and have a good time. But don't hang your whole livelihood on a romantic partner first in a situation that you're probably not going to continue as you get older, right? And so that really resonated with her, and it helped her reframe what healthy, successful relationships can look like. Because to me, a healthy, successful relationship doesn't mean you don't break up. All people come into our lives for a season, for a reason, for, that saying that's kind of silly, but it's true. And we can love people and have to move on from those people. We can love people and they're not our people, right? And that's just life. And so I think that while it's painful and I understand the pain, I think that with Mauricio and Kyle and Craig and Paige, we have to stop looking at the definitions of what makes something successful. Being married forever and being miserable, or staying together forever and being miserable, is success. What is success is being together for a period of time, building something together, loving each other, and then moving on when it no longer serves you. That is true love. And so I just think society has kind of framed stuff in a weird way, but that's how I'm going to reframe it for you all. And I hope that any young people listening to this kind of understand that and not take it so seriously, because it's, okay. So then we see Austin, Paige, and Craig get together to talk about relationship issues. And Austin, here's the thing. Austin has been on my nerves, I've talked about it a lot. I'm not going to talk about it more, but I was like, damn, he is so spot on here. He said, when I'm with them, I notice they are so on opposite sides of the spectrum of life. And it's like, he's freakishly spot on. And week after week, it's just like apparent that these are two good people moving in different directions. Madison revealed that Brett's kidney biopsy revealed no cancer. And of course, we now know that she is pregnant with a baby girl due in the summer. And I'm like, Madison, being pregnant in Charleston in the summer, oh, bless your heart. But I'm so happy for them. And I just, I wish the best for them. Madison said something important that I did want to focus on, which is, once you experience something like this, you'll always worry. But she acknowledged it's important to move on and live life. And so for me, I just want to reiterate that sentiment, because that's how I live my life. I do have a chronic incurable cancer, but I'm happy most days, not obsessed with worry. And, there's a saying, the Stoics have a saying called memento mori, which is, remember, we will all die. I'm not special. I'm not, just because I have a chronic incurable cancer doesn't mean I'm special. And so I think it's just one of those human components that, why worry about things that don't matter and we don't have control over? It just gives you, the worry gives us the facade of control, but it really is in fact quite the opposite. And so I've learned that, and it's hard to practice, but all I can say is practice and it gets easier. And then cut to Shep saying, usually I get what I want, yada, yada. I'm a spoiled brat. Ugh, woof. He goes, looking back, it's good to get your heart broken. It's your story. And here's my problem with Shep. Shep romanticizes everything because he just doesn't want to sit with rejection. Bloop. He doesn't. And not everything is an opportunity for poetry. Sometimes things simply suck and all we can do is feel to heal. There's no shortcut. I think that Shep's insights seem positive and healthy, but I actually think they serve as deflection to soothe his ego. These men, they really don't like to feel. They like to use women to make them feel whole or purposeful or good, and they don't realize that the call is coming from inside the house. But the end of the episode of Southern Charm is what blew my mind. It starts with a haircut and ends with JT quitting the show. And at this point, JT must have some sort of Pavlovian response to like a coffee shop, because he's been reamed inside and out at too many coffee shops. I'm like, if I even saw coffee after this, I would start like having a PTSD reaction. So according to, there's a tale of two Ryans here. Okay, so there's the Ryan who's a friend of on the show, and then there's a Ryan who's a barber. Okay, so the barber Ryan was cutting JT's hair, and JT allegedly said there is some quote unquote black girl who's been coming on to him and trying to ruin his relationship. So Vanita and Leva give him the benefit of the doubt. Leva meets up with JT, which, by the way, like, I don't understand what Leva's doing here. She's never on the show except when it comes to like these really pivotal moments, and then she shows up for the reunion. And I'm like, where are you the rest of the time? I don't understand that. But so Leva meets JT for coffee. Initially, JT admits to flirtatious vibes, but denied wrongdoing. But then Leva dropped the hammer. And initially, JT was incredulous. And when he called the barber, I was like, oh my gosh. So the barber claims, this is what happened. This is what the barber claims. I was asking what was going on with the show, and you said that there's an interest with a cute black girl on the show, Vanita. That was really the gist of it. Wasn't much context. There wasn't really much context else around that, which is not proper grammar. That's why it confused me, but that was his quote. And he said, I may have said it because I was not articulate. Okay. So the problem here is, it's clear that JT is an unreliable narrator. If his girlfriend wouldn't like him flirting with Vanita, she surely wouldn't be happy about him calling Vanita and declaring his love, which is exactly what he did. So JT gets off the phone with this person, Ryan. He calmly and politely thanks Ryan for his time and then loses it after the call. And I'm confused. I'm like, well, if you're so angry, why are you not confronting Ryan and telling him this information isn't correct. If someone's lying about me, I'm not going to thank them and then hang up. I know that for sure. So JT calls Vanita panicked, and which was shocking enough until he says, I love you. And it's like, okay, so JT is like going on this tirade that Ryan made him out to be a racist, which he fervently denied due to his aforementioned love for Vanita. Okay, so I want to clear something up here. Number one, it kind of sounds like a game of telephone that went awry, which is like, I can understand that, but it comes to the whole black girl categorization that I don't like, that nobody liked, that doesn't need to be said. Vanita is a person. She's not black. I mean, she is a black person, but she's a person. And I think that saying that you love somebody, like, you can love or be married to a black person and still be racist. Like, people, you can't declare that you're not racist because of X, Y, or Z. But so I think it's unlikely that JT said everything he's been accused of, but there are too many scenarios indicating that there are some kernels of truth. And I definitely think that JT, there's been some emotional infidelity because it's complex, but the general rule is if you're lying to your significant other about it, it's a red flag. Like, if you're having a conversation with someone and you're not talking to your significant other about it, or you're leaving details out, there's some emotional infidelity stuff going there, right? And JT is not innocent in this. The problem is JT sees himself as a truth teller. And so if you're a truth teller, you can't possibly make mistakes, right? Well, that's incorrect. He doesn't understand how he's the source of his own problems. And so JT showed up for the reunion. I'm telling you, I'm frothing at the mouth to follow up on this whole thing and to hear Vanita talk about it. Because at the end of the day, she's now watched everything. And what she's experienced with JT, I can't wait to hear what she has to say about all that. So that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for listening today. This was so much fun. Please stay tuned this week for my goal is to do a bite-sized bish about, I don't know, whatever seems to be interesting to my brain. One other thing I wanted to tell you before I close out for the day is that I am going to do whatever my season finale is. I'm going to do the season finale on Scamanda and Belle Gibson, who were two influencers who faked cancer very differently and in very different situations. I have watched both the documentaries. I'm in the process of rewatching them, taking notes, and that will be the season finale for Your Bish Therapist. So I'm going to keep talking about all these shows. Can't wait till the Valley comes back on. And that, whenever that will be my season finale. So please stay tuned for that. Also, please, I would love if you could go check out my Patreon. I post a lot of bonus content. And so sometimes when I'm not doing a bite-sized bish, I'll still post something to Patreon. We have group chats. We have direct messaging. It's a real fun community over there. Please come over and see what it's all about. And if you also could be so kind, please give a 5-star review. I just want you to all know that, I know I say this all the time, but I really mean it. You all support me more than people who are supposed to support me. And it's just never lost on me, all the different types of support, whether it's on the podcast, social media, Patreon, whatever it is. Just know that it makes an impact for me. And I'm just grateful to have you all. Thank you so much. Sending love to you and yours. And ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Great Heart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.